Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update, and the Easter holiday week has brought some respite from 2 weeks of record lows and record highs for ANZ Roy Morgan's key indicators. There's also widespread approval for the Albanese government's decision to cut the fuel excise early last week. 83% of Australians approve of the temporary cut to the fuel excise on petrol and diesel for the next 3 months. Only 17% disapprove, according to the special Roy Morgan SMS poll. Approval's high across all parties, with 86% of Labor voters, 83% of LNP voters, 77% of Green voters, and 71% of One Nation voters giving their approval. This Roy Morgan research shows 37% of Australians are aware of fuel shortages in their area as of last week. People in New South Wales are most likely to be aware of fuel shortages in their area, 46%. People in country areas are more likely to be aware of these fuel shortages in their area than people in capital cities. Almost 1 in 4 Australians, 24%, say fuel shortages or rising fuel prices have affected their ability to carry out essential activities like going to work and attending appointments, etc. 76% say they haven't been affected. When asked about changing behaviour, 48% of Australians have reduced their driving, 20% have changed travel plans, 19% have decreased spending in other areas to make up for petrol price increases, and 11% have purchased less fuel than usual. 9% have filled up more fuel than needed to deal with potential shortages and a rising price. Around a third of Australians, 34%, say they've made no changes to behaviour due to the fuel crisis. And who do we blame? Well, most Australians say the US President Donald Trump and US leadership are most responsible for the fuel supply challenges. 38% mention each. 28% say the Australian federal government, both current and past, followed by the Middle East conflict itself, mentioned by 22%. And 20% say oil and fuel companies price gouging and taking advantage of the situation. For further in-depth detail on what Australians are saying about the current fuel crisis, head to the Roy Morgan website. Now, the Roy Morgan poll federal two-party preferred results show the ALP 56%, down 0.5%, ahead of the Coalition on 44%, based on how electors said they would vote. If a federal election were held now, the ALP would be returned to government with a large majority, according to Roy Morgan interviewing conducted from March 30 to April 5, with a representative Australia-wide cross-section of 1,411 electors. And Roy Morgan government confidence trended lower last week, now 62%, up 2.5% of electors say the country's going in the wrong direction. Only 23% say the country's going in the right direction. This means the Roy Morgan government confidence rating was down 4 points to just 61, nearly 40 points below the neutral level of 100. Now, analysis of voting trends by age shows stark differences in where people are putting their support based on their age. For people aged 18 to 34, the ALP is favoured massively by 69% to 31% over the Coalition on a two-party preferred basis. This drops significantly for people aged 35 to 49, with the ALP ahead 60.5 to 39.5. While for people 50 to 64, the ALP has a narrow lead, 52.5 to 47.5%, and for people aged 65 plus, the Coalition leads at 57.5% to 42.5%. Primary voting intention by age reveals something even more remarkable. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, overall the ALP primary vote was 30.5%, up 0.5%. The LNP Coalition was 24%, up 1.5%. Liberals were up 0.5% to 20%, and Nationals up 1% to 4%. One Nation was down 2% to 21.5%, Greens down 1.5% to 12%, and Independents and other parties were up 1.5% to 12%. Now, for people aged 18 to 34, Greens have the most support at 27%, just ahead of the ALP on 26.5%. For people aged 35 to 49, it's the ALP, 37.5% with the most support, well ahead of One Nation on 20%. For people aged 50 to 64, One Nation at 30.5% and the ALP on 31% are almost equal in support. While for people aged 65 plus, the LNP coalition on 36.5% has most support, and the ALP is a distant second on 27.5%. And now to consumer confidence. The ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence increased 3.5 points to 62.3. That's the first increase since the Middle East war started in late February. However, despite the rise, this is the second lowest reading for consumer confidence since the series began more than 50 years ago. ANZ Roy Morgan inflation expectations dropped only slightly by 0.1% to 7.2%, down from last week's record high. This means Australians expect annual inflation of 7.2% in each of the next 2 years. Still the second highest reading for this measure ever recorded. And finally today, to business confidence. This may just be the most important indicator of all. Perhaps surprisingly to some, business confidence stabilised in March after the dramatic falls in January and February. March business confidence was up 2.1 points to 90.7. Driving the small increase was a slight increase to confidence about the Australian economy's performance over the next 12 months and the next 5 years. Some more positive sentiment from the business community, despite the Middle Eastern conflict and back-to-back interest rate increases in February and March, is welcome, although the index remains fragile at a low level, almost 10 points below the neutral level of 100. The Roy Morgan Business Confidence Series is based on interviews with 1,000 businesses each month to gauge their views on their company's prospects, as well as their assessment of the broader Australian economy. And looking forward to next week, I'll be back to bring you the latest data for unemployment, consumer confidence and inflation expectations, and the latest voting intention. Following today's announcement of a 2-week ceasefire in the Middle East, next week may bring some more positive sentiment. Thanks for listening.